So we as the church have a Father in heaven that is greater and more powerful than anything the world has ever known, right? We have a God who has given us so much. Imagine for a moment the story of Jesus. Imagine the sacrifice, the suffering, and the price paid so that we could have this God. We possess within our very beings the spirit of this powerful God, the same spirit that has the power to raise the dead, as it did in Christ and as it is now doing in us. We have a God with the power to create or destroy, a fearful power in which to stand in awe of, yet we're able to call Him Father and even friend. Right, just so we imagine this morning as we were reading through the plagues in Egypt, that God who has the power to do those things and said, hey, I have the power to just say, forget these plagues, just wipe me off. Okay? That God is Father and friend. What would drive such a powerful, such a perfect, such an unfailing God to send His own Son and sacrifice of His own being with unmatched pain and suffering to claim us as His own? Why would a God who is in need of absolutely nothing choose to give everything for us who have little worth, and in fact, very oftentimes spit in the face of the Creator that made us? We find ourselves stuck in a world filled with the miserable results of defiance of God, yet He would give all for us. Why would this be? Is God crazy? Well, if anyone in human flesh were to act the way that God has towards us, they would be described as crazy, wouldn't they? There is one primary attribute of God which drives Him to do all this for His ungrateful children. In fact, quite often God is described as this, as we see again in 1 John, right? It is God's love which drives Him to such actions which might be interpreted as crazy or insane. God is love. But not simply love for everything, but love for us. How can we ever repay such love? How can we make ourselves to be worthy? Well, we can't. Which makes it all the more crazy. If I were to reach out in sacrificial love to someone, I would expect, at the very least, some form of love in return. And if I didn't receive it, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for me to continue to love them. I would be offended and I would be pushed to walk away. I did this for you and you just walk away? Now there are times when I can push through and force myself to love through the pain. But ultimately, there are always going to be places where I fail. And this again is why God's love seems crazy to us, because it's not something we find ourselves able to accomplish. But how deep is God's love? We know that song, how deep the Father's... Well, how deep? Okay? Let's stop talking about how deep is it, actually. How greatly does God love us? Let's turn over to Hosea chapter 4. Hosea chapter 4. Hosea chapter 4. Start in verse 1. Hear the word of the Lord, O children of Israel. For the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land. There is no faithfulness or steadfast love, and no knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing, lying, murder, stealing, and committing adultery. They break all bonds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and all who dwell in it languish. And also the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens, and even the fish of the sea are taken away. Yet let no one contend, and let no one accuse. For with you is my contention, O priest. You stumble by day, the prophet also shall stumble with you by night. And I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I reject you from being a priest to me. And since you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children. The more they increased, the more they sinned against me. I will change their glory into shame. And let's jump down, chapter 5, starting verse 9. Ephraim shall become a desolation in the day of punishment. Among the tribes of Israel I make known what is sure. The princes of Judah have become like those who love the landmark. Upon them I will pour out my wrath like water. Ephraim is oppressed, crushed in judgment, because he was determined to go after filth. Doesn't sound so positive so far, does it? One important thing to understand before we get moving beyond this is that when we hear in Hosea, Ephraim, it means all of Israel. The tribe of Ephraim, which is a part of the northern kingdom of Israel, also known as Samaria, was considered the worst of the worst. Ephraim was the measure of what it meant to abandon and profane God. They were rock bottom in relationship with God. What Hosea is doing is using the name of Ephraim to show them that they are all in the same place. Every one of them. Just because they're not as bad as Ephraim doesn't mean they're not just as fallen as Ephraim. Ephraim might have fallen further, but fallen is still fallen, is it not? We have read all these atrocities that the children of God have committed against the Father. It's set up like a court case. The word that we translate as controversy is a legal word in Hebrew. From the courts. I have a lawsuit to bring against you. So God has taken them to court. This is their trial. Much of the prophets are written in the same way, as in a court case. You love the law so much. Well, let's go to the law and see where it leaves you. This first section we read in chapter 5 is only part of the charges brought against Israel. Ultimately, it all comes down to they have broken the covenant they have entered into with God. They accepted His blessings, His gifts. They have called themselves children. In fact, they still expect the same blessings they've been experiencing all along. But they have chosen not to be loyal to Him. They chose to pursue the world rather than their Father. This indictment does not give us any reason to think that God would save them. As we work through the court case, we go, well, clearly, Ephraim was bad. Clearly, Israel's a mess. Clearly, they are condemned and guilty. So let's move on to the sentencing now, right? That's where you go when you get to the sentence, right? We've already determined they are guilty, so let's get to the sentence. They are condemned. God has said, I will destroy you. Okay, so there's the sentence, right? The sentence for the crime committed. So much of Hosea and the rest of the prophets, they're filled with charges against Israel. You have done this, and this, therefore you should be destroyed. There's an unending list of hatred and rejection, not simply of God, but hatred and rejection of His creation, His people, and especially the poor. There is a constant stream of punishments that becomes listed out. This is what I will do to you. But if God is love, then where is all the love? But then if we continue on, it becomes the amazing part. The judgments, the sentences for the wrongs committed, they were never carried out. If the sentence for their crimes was death and it had been carried out, then there would today be no church. So why did God not carry out the rightful judgment? Why did He take them to court, show them guilty, sentence them, and then not carry out the sentence? Again, why did God choose to instead send His Son to suffer instead of carrying out justice? God is love, and if we keep reading in Hosea, we begin to see that. The next verse, verse 12. Chapter 5, verse 12. It says, but, so just finish saying, because he was determined to go after filth, but, remember we we talked about this before. But, remember Jesus is that but. He makes you forget everything that preceded. He wipes away everything else. Remember the eraser the one day? Right? But, there goes everything before that. But, I am like a moth to Ephraim, and like a dry rot to the house of Judah. This is the depth of God's love for His children. Ephraim, the very worst of the worst, the one leading the way in rejection of the very one who loves them. God is drawn to him. The very ones that says there is no faithfulness or steadfast love and no knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing, lying, murder, stealing, and committing adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Those people are the ones that says, I am like a moth to, like dry rot to. God is like a moth to His people. No matter how bad they are, no matter how much they have rejected Him, God cannot stay away from them. This is but a glimpse of the depth of the love of God. We go from day to day making mistakes and failing, and yet God can't keep away. Imagine for a moment, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nietzsche, but Nietzsche, in all his philosophy, came to his grand conclusion: God is dead. That was the conclusion of all his work. He says, there is no God, and if there was, He died. He says extremely terrible things against His Creator. Then he publishes them, and many read them as he tries to convince others of the very same conclusion. And very many others are convinced by his writings. Yet, this text is telling us that God is attracted even to him like a moth. He can't stay away. He buzzes around, bumping into him. He's irresistibly drawn to him. This is pretty powerful. God is drawn to us. Think about the moth as you turn on a light in the dark. You might think you've got all the windows shut. You might think the doors are sealed tight, right? No air can possibly get in or out, but yet somehow, somewhere, there's a moth that found its way in, and it has found its way to your light. No matter where they are, they will find a way to get to the light. They can't stay away. And this is God's love for us. He created us because He loves us. He loved us before He created us, and that's why He created us. Wrap your mind around that, right? And that love has never changed or gone away. Even better yet, our God is not sitting passively by, watching and loving from a distance, but rather He's actively pursuing us, doing anything He can just to stay near to us. Our God's love is so strong that He cannot bear to be apart. It hurts and pains Him to stay away from us. Or rather, it hurts and pains Him when we won't let Him in, when we shut the screen door and lock Him out. Remember the image we talked about last week? One from Isaiah 42. Yes, that was it. Isaiah 42. Where we hear this, here comes this rumbling, thundering God, and He is coming, and creation is being scattered in His presence. And He's crying out and roaring loud, and here He comes. And why is He coming? Because His people are crying out. Because His children are in pain. Like a moth, He can't stay away. Then there's that image of rot. No matter how hard you try, you can't get rid of the rot. Once it's there, it's there. And it's going to continue to spread. It keeps coming back. You can't get rid of God. You can't push Him away. He keeps coming back. It's a pretty good thing for us that God can't take a hint, isn't it? Because if God could take a hint and He read into what we wanted, and He even listened to what we wanted, we would get ourselves in a whole lot of trouble. It's a good thing that when we cried out, I want a king, God said, not this time, right? We can try to wash off his love, but it comes back over and over again. God loves forever. It's attached to us and it simply won't go away. In chapter 2 of Hosea, when it talks of Israel playing the whore, God couldn't help. He couldn't help himself, but still provide for them anyway. Let's continue to read Hosea, starting in verse 13 there. Chapter 5, verse 13. I don't think I got that up on the board, sorry, so you're not going to find it. I just realized I missed that one. When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah his wound, they saw they're sick, right? They saw they need help. What are they going to do? Then Ephraim went to Assyria and sent to the great king. But he is not able to cure you or heal your wounds. For I will be like a lion to Ephraim, and like a young lion to the house of Judah. Even I, will tear and go away. I will carry off, and no one shall rescue. I will return again to my place, until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. And in their distress earnestly seek me. Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us, that he may heal us. He has struck us down, and he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the 3rd day, he will raise us up, that we may live before him. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Let us press on to know the Lord. He is going out. His going out is sure as the dawn. He will come to us as the showers, as the spring rains that water the earth. Israel is in need, right? And they even realize it. We've got a problem here. But they still won't go back to God. They go to someone else for help. Because they've spent so much time away from him, they've forgotten who he is. So God says, I brought these charges against you. This is your sentence. But if you just come back, if you just recognize your guilt, he says, I would let you off, and justice would not be played out. He says, despite the fact that I am so attracted to you, despite the fact that I cannot stay away from you, I will force myself, I will leave. God says, so strong is my love for you, so strong is my desire to be near to you, but I will leave you and wait for you to come back to me. I will suffer in pain and hurt until you come back to me. It hurts God to be apart from us. He cannot stand to be away. Yet God says, I have to, I will leave. Come back to me and my love will stick to you like rock again. Remember we've talked about this before. God loves us. He wants to be near to us. But God will not go where he is not wanted. He will not force himself upon us. That is not love. But Israel never came back. They never said, let us press on to know the Lord, did they? Chapter 6, 1 through 3, that's not something they said. That's a prophetic tool saying, if they would only say this. But they never said that. They never got there. Instead, they ran further away. And this is where the true depth of God's love is revealed to us. This is where we start to understand why he would send his son Jesus. Not simply to preach us back, but to in fact suffer and die so that we could be back. Just like the moth is God's love for us, it can't stay away. God said, you've been judged, may the sentence be filled, I will stay away. But it hurt God so much, it pained him so greatly to stay away. Every moment he sat at a distance waiting for us to come back to him, it caused him even greater suffering. In Isaiah 22:4 it says, look away from me, let me weep bitter tears. Do not labor to comfort me concerning the destruction of the daughter of my people. How many times we imagine that image of God? God saying, no, just leave me alone. Don't look at me. I'm just crying too hard. Leave me be. Don't try to comfort me. I am inconsolable. God couldn't bear it anymore. He could no longer restrain himself. He couldn't hold back any longer. Just like the moth you can only keep it away for so long before it finds a way. God's love is so strong. He was so overcome with compassion that God, in fact, acted contrary to his own judgment. He couldn't bear being apart from us any longer. God took off from his place of observation, and his love was poured out upon us once again. He sent Jesus. The power of God's love for us is so great that the suffering of the torture and death of Christ, the pain of taking on the sin of all of us, could not measure up to the pain of being separated. You catch it? It hurt God more to be apart from us than it did to suffer on the cross. That's how greatly he loves us. God cannot bear to be apart from us. For God to restrain himself and to not love us hurts him more than the pain of Jesus' sacrifice. God's love for us is so great that nothing, absolutely nothing, could hurt him more than to be apart from us. This is the depth of God's love. A crazy love that breaks rules and forgoes justice, just so that we can be together. And so here is my challenge. I hope and pray that the book of Hosea can bring us to the realization of the depth of God's love for us. But more importantly, I pray that it gives you the realization of God's love for the broken, of God's desire to be near to those who are yet to be touched. We are the hands and feet of God. We are his love to the world. Can we love with this kind of love? Can we be so broken? Can we love the broken so much that it hurts to be apart? Can we practice a love for this world that is like a moth to the worst of the worst and like rot never going away? Better yet, not can we, because the Spirit does enable us to, doesn't it? But will we allow the love and desire of God to fill us so greatly that we literally hurt and pain for the world? That we become so filled with desire that we do crazy things for the sake of the other. That we cannot bear to stand back and watch. But we have to get dirty and we have to hurt with them. Will we love others with a love that is so great that it hurts more to not practice that love than to physically and financially suffer alongside them? Will we love with the power and strength of the Father as Jesus did?